Do I really have to practice in all 12 keys? Yes. The answer is yes. End of lesson. I'll see you in the woodshed. Bye. You're still here? I bet you thought this was going to be one of those YouTube lessons where I tell you the 5 secrets to never needing to practice in all 12 keys again. Well, I've got some bad news for you. Practicing in all 12 keys is one of the most tried and tested ways of incorporating new and varied ideas into our improvisational language. While we know this to be true, there can be times when it actually makes sense for us to limit the number of keys that we practice new harmonic and melodic ideas in. By doing so, we can digest these ideas faster and hopefully hear them in an organic way in our performances sooner. What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in this week. Today we are taking apart something that's really counterintuitive for us as practicing improvisers, and that's actually not practicing things in all 12 keys. This is a really common approach for all of us probably if we work on different licks, different harmonic ideas, different melodic ideas, but there is a time and place where maybe this is not the best avenue for us to go. We've probably all had the experience where we're working on a particular melodic idea or harmonic idea for a couple days, maybe even a couple weeks, and we feel pretty confident about playing that idea in all 12 keys, but it just never really lands in our actual performances. This is when you've got to ask yourself about, is practicing in all 12 keys the most effective way for you to learn whatever concept you are trying to work on? And actually spending that time of working in all 12 keys in certain situations is actually limiting your ability to incorporate this into your actual playing. Now, as I said up top of this lesson, there is no substitute for playing in all 12 keys. You absolutely have to work on this if you want to be able to play fluently through the jazz language. Today, we're really just going to look at some other options. This isn't by no means an either-or type of situation. It's a both-and. These are just different tools that we want to have at our disposal in order to move through new material quickly and effectively. If you find this content interesting, I really encourage you to check out what we're doing over in the virtual studio. You can find the link down in the description. There's a great handle that'll go with this lesson, as there is for every week, and also an additional guided practice session where we will practice some of this stuff together. So I encourage you to go check that out, see what we're doing over there if you want to work some of this stuff in a more organized practice fashion versus just a conceptual fashion that we're going to talk about today. So I, like you probably, am a diligent practicer of things in all 12 keys. And for me, that usually means that I'm going to work them in one way. That sort of practice is probably familiar to you. I was taking a little short 2/5 lick and moving it counterclockwise around the circle of fifths. So I played it in C, then in F, then in B flat, then in E flat. For me, that is my go-to way of practicing in all 12 keys. However, this sets up a few problems that when I go to actually incorporate this stuff into an actual performance or have it hopefully arrive organically in a performance, that practicing this way can limit my improvement. If I am always practicing in this same fashion, I'm going to become sort of habituated to that particular pattern of moving ideas. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That little bit of consistency in our practice can help us improve. However, if we have too much of that, as soon as we start seeing these ideas or trying to use these ideas in other ways, it's going to be difficult for them to sort of land in our playing. Maybe I feel great about, moving this idea from F to B flat to E flat, but what if it's suddenly from F and then I have to maybe suddenly modulate to E major and then to G or wherever a particular tune takes me? It might be harder for me to sort of access those ideas both from a listening standpoint and just from sort of a music theory kind of thinking standpoint. The second problem with this sort of practice, at least when we're going around the circle of fifths, is that we sort of hit the quote unquote hard keys a little later in sort of our go around through the keys. If we start at C and work our way around the circle, we're not going to get to G flat, B major, E major until a little bit later. Now, those keys are not necessarily harder on themselves, but they are definitely less common for us to play in and probably a little less familiar, so we might not feel as confident. And if we've already played through half a dozen keys by the time we get to B major, our brain is probably not as ready to really focus, especially if the lick that we're trying to work on is particularly challenging or the harmonic concept is particularly challenging. The final thing that can be problematic when we're just working on like, I've got to play through all 12 keys, is we think that that is sort of the end result that we're looking for. Really, the end result that we want to have is that these ideas that we practice come out in our playing in a natural way. The audience doesn't care if we can play every idea in every key. They just care that they're hearing a nice solo, and that no matter where we are on the instrument, where we are in the tune, that we can execute the ideas that we're hearing. Practicing in all 12 keys is just a way to get there. All right, let's put this into practice. We are going to take 3 different ideas: a blues idea, a 2/5 idea, and then a diminished dominant idea. And we're going to practice them in some different ways that don't revolve around us hitting all 12 keys. So we're going to start with our blues idea. We're going to play this simple phrase. So rather than moving around the circle like we already did to hit all 12 keys, we're going to start in C major, and we are going to ascend through the keys by whole steps. This is going to take us through half of the circle. We're going to play in C, then in D, then in E, and so on and so forth. This is going to help us move through a pretty varied kind of center of keys or different key areas as we kind of move through the circle a little bit quicker. And it's also going to allow us to be a little more efficient with our time. So maybe rather than just 1 or 2 reps through each key, we maybe can get 4 or 6 reps through each key. That's going to really help us land it more if we're trying to employ this idea in a solo. Let's check out what that would sound like. So clearly I didn't actually ascend that entire time, right? Since I started in the upper register, I actually had to jump it down an octave. I probably could have played the second key, the key of D, up an octave, but I just thought I'd be a little more confident if I played it down an octave. So you just got to be a little sensible about where these are going to fit best into your range. So already we have saved ourselves a lot of practice time, which means we could get more reps, as I mentioned. But by moving through these keys in a different way, I sort of have to like think in a different way. I'm not sort of like in that ballpark of like C, F, G, that little kind of like 3-note grouping where a lot of the notes are the same and it's a little easier to maybe connect the ideas. By going from C to D to E, I'm suddenly in no flats or sharps, then a couple sharps, then quite a few sharps, and then suddenly I got to turn and think, all right, well, am I thinking this in F sharp major or am I thinking in G flat major? And those are the kind of challenges we want to present our brain with so we can have some flexibility when we're thinking about these things so that way we can land them wherever we want to in a tune. All right, on to our 2-5-1 idea. Now the idea is this. Pretty classic sounding long 2-5. Now here, rather than moving it by whole steps, we're going to move it by major thirds. So we're going to hit it in the key of C, E, and A flat, again ascending here. If we go another major third, we're going to be back to C. So we're actually only worried about 3 key centers here. The same principle applies. Because we are really narrowing our focus, we maybe can get a few more reps in these different keys. And again, these are very varied key signatures. We don't move by major thirds that often. Maybe if we're playing giant steps or something like that, we might, but not very often do we move key centers and major thirds very quickly like this. So we've got to have a really malleable brain and also a malleable way to think about the range of the instrument, because I'm really going to be having to change the range as I go through these different keys. Let's check this out in all 3 of these keys. Again, I had to be sensitive to range there. That second one, maybe I could have played up an octave. That high C sharp is definitely in my range, but I just felt like I might not land this lick. You know, I just didn't have the confidence up there that I would like to, so I played it down an octave, which is still in a nice range, a nice soloistic range of the instrument. But I can move through a lot of different ranges like this, and hopefully by covering these very disparate keys, some of that information, especially if I get a lot of reps on that, is going to carry over to some of the other keys. So maybe if I'm in the key of E flat, where I didn't practice it, all those notes are only a half step away of where I did practice it in the key of E. So hopefully I can still hear this idea, kind of know the music theory of this idea, and then land it when I'm actually taking a solo. And then eventually it's going to come out organically. Okay, our final idea we're going to work on is a diminished dominant idea, something that we might use on a dominant chord with a flat 9, sharp 9, that type of thing. Now here, rather than worrying about moving in a specific set kind of interval, we're going to look at a tune and look at the key areas that are in that tune and only worry about those key centers. So our song is going to be the tune It Could Happen to You. Great common standard. We're just going to look at the first 16 bars. Now, when we talk about a key area, I hesitate to even say a key center here. This tune is probably going to have key centers because we're really being defined by 2 5s for the most part. So we really are going to be pretty firmly in these different keys. But in certain tunes, you might need to be a little more squishy about how you define these key areas and depending on what sort of concept you are trying to work on. So be thoughtful when you're applying this stuff. So if we look at our changes here, we're really looking for the 2 5s to help us define these key centers. We're really going to look at the long 2 5s today. There's a couple of other places where the keys sort of do shift, particularly in the first 4 bars. We're not going to be worried about that for today's discussion. So I highlighted the different key centers in a couple different colors. You see I have a 2-5-1 to F minor that I've highlighted in blue. I have a couple of 2-5-1s to E flat where I have an F minor 7 to B flat 7, and then I also have one that is a 2-5 to B flat. However, it actually never resolves there. This is in the last phrase. I highlighted it in purple, and you see I have C minor 7 to F7. It never resolves to B flat. It's sort of tonicizing that area, that 2-5-1 back to E flat, which is kind of like a longer section of B flat. This is a pretty common gesture in most kind of American songbook types tunes, and you could just think about it in terms of a 6 to a dominant 2 chord, or thinking this 2-5 is great. Incidentally, you could also think about that 2 bars as a C minor section. That would be nice as well. But either way, let's check out these 3 key centers and how we can apply our diminished lick. So knowing that we have a key center that goes to F, one that goes to E flat, and one that goes to B flat, we just want to think about what the dominant chords are that set those up. It's a C7, it's a B flat 7, and it's an F7. We're going to make all these flat 9 chords, whether they are actually in the chart or not, because we want to try to practice this idea. Our diminished lick that we're going to use sounds like this. Now, that was in the key of C. And this lesson is not about how we build, kind of our language in a diminished dominant scale, but just give you the short version here. Basically what I'm doing, this is the half whole diminished scale. In that scale, there are 4 embedded triads. There's a triad based off of the root, off of the flat third, off of the sharp 11 or tritone, and off of the 6th. So here I can build a nice little idea off of those different triads that are embedded in each one of these chords. So my lick, or my cell, I should say, is this. It is essentially the root, the 9, the 5, and then it resolves to the 3rd of that little triad that's in the chord, or excuse me, the scale. Now the great thing about that lick is the next chord, if I go down through that scale, is going to be, I played it in C there, it's going to be A. It's going to be based off of the 6th. So the 3rd of the C triad shape becomes the 5th of the A triad shape, and this goes down through each one of those chords. So again, we get this. I'll highlight each one of these key centers as I play it quite slowly here. So that's the idea. We might delve into that in a little more detail at a future lesson, but we want to be able to play that in our 3 key centers. This is a relatively complicated lick, one that is relatively challenging to execute quickly. So this is a really key place where you want to narrow that focus to just the places that you need this particular piece of vocabulary, because it might be challenging to work it in all 12 keys. Pretty tricky stuff here. So again, lots of slow practice. You would want to get a bunch of reps through each one of those before you really worry about applying it so that you can actually land this lick. If you know it, but you can never actually play it or hear it in context, it doesn't matter if you know it and can play it in all 12 keys. You have to be able to land it. That's the only thing that matters. So if you can only play it in one key, maybe you can only play it in the C251, or excuse me, the F251, where the C is the dominant 7th chord, or maybe only in B flat. Work it there until it feels like it actually works in your playing, and then try to move it to some other keys. The great thing about this particular idea is because each one of these chords has other chords embedded in it, when you actually learn one of these, you're really learning 4 of them. So for example, when we learn it in C, we're also kind of learning it in the keys of E flat, G flat, and A, because those other chords are embedded in there. And the same thing would be true if we had an A7 chord. Those same other chords are embedded in there, or a G flat dominant 7th chord. So you get a lot of mileage just learning this in one key, and then hopefully you can carry it over. So let's throw all this together and see how this sounds on this tune. I'll throw a play along on and try to incorporate some of these diminished dominant licks. Now, I'm not going to play the lick just verbatim the way I played it. I'm going to try to play it a slightly more musical fashion, where maybe I only take a couple of those little cells, and I might not always start on the root. So even though it's a C7 chord, I might not start on C7. I might start on A7 or G flat 7. You know, I've done the practice that hopefully I can apply those. I wouldn't say that maybe this is the strongest part of my improvisational language, but it is something that I work on fairly regularly and feel like does come out of my playing naturally relatively often. So let's check this out with a play along, see how that sounds. All right, there you have it. Hopefully those are some practical ways that you can think about just changing up the routine that you might go through when you're working on different ideas through different key centers. As I said at the beginning of the lesson, no substitute for practicing in all 12 keys. I want to see no comments down in the comment section that are like, Sean, you really got to practice in all 12 keys. Of course you do. We all know this, but it's important that we have a variety of ways to work through this material that can help to supplement this 12 key practice approach that is so common. All right, we will see you in the woodshed.